Welcome to Fiction Flux. Today, we're diving into an exciting new fanfiction. What if Female Deku was in the world of Darling in the Franxx? Imagine a world where Izumi Midoriya, our badass female Deku, finds herself in the futuristic, war-torn universe of Darling in the Franxx. How would her determination, quirks or lack thereof, and unique personality shape this world? How would she handle the Klaxosaurs, the mysterious Franxx, and an intense partnership with Hiro? Let's not waste any time and jump straight into this thrilling, emotional, and romantic journey. Izumi Midoriya had always dreamed of being a hero. Growing up in a world where quirks were the defining trait of one's identity, she had always fought to be more than just ordinary. A girl without a quirk, she had relied on her resolve, determination, and selflessness to push herself beyond her limits. But the world she woke up to now, this world of colossal monsters, towering mechas, and battle-hardened soldiers, was far from the one she had known. She had arrived in the world of Darling in the Franxx unexpectedly. One moment, she had been training to become a hero in her own world, and the next, she found herself in a dark, post-apocalyptic future where humanity was on the brink of extinction, fighting against monstrous creatures known as Klaxosaurs. She was no longer just Izumi Midoriya, the aspiring hero. In this new world, she was a warrior, thrust into a fight for survival. Izumi's body had changed since her arrival. Her once straight green hair now had a slight wave to it, and two elegant, jet-black horns curved up from her head, shiny and sleek, but unmistakable. At first, she had been confused, even terrified, by them. Were they a curse, a mutation, or something else entirely? But as time passed, she learned to accept them as part of her new identity. They weren't a mistake, they were a symbol of her connection to this world, to the Franxx, and to her partner, Hiro. The pilot suit she wore, form-fitting, dark, and armored, accentuated her athletic build. It was a perfect fit for the combat she would endure, designed to protect and withstand the rigors of piloting a giant mecha. But it also highlighted the raw, fierce energy that coursed through her every time she stood tall, ready for battle. And in that battle, Hiro was always by her side. Hiro was different from anyone she had ever met. He wasn't a perfect hero like the ones she had admired, nor was he a fighter by choice. Once full of potential and optimism, Hiro had lost himself somewhere along the way, fading into uncertainty and despair. But when Izumi was paired with him to pilot the Franxx, something clicked. She wasn't just a partner to him, she was a beacon of hope, a reminder that he wasn't alone. And in turn, he brought something out of her that she hadn't known existed. Together, they were unstoppable. Though Hiro had his doubts about himself, Izumi never hesitated. She believed in him, in their partnership, and in their ability to protect the world around them. Every time they climbed into the cockpit, her heart synced with his, their thoughts, emotions, and strength flowing together as one. The mecha they piloted, Strelizia, responded to their every movement as though it were an extension of themselves. As they battled Klaxosaurs, Izumi's horns, though they marked her as different, felt more like an asset, an emblem of her inner strength. In battle, the dark horns glowed faintly, as if they were resonating with the energy from the Franxx itself. Her connection to the machine, to Hiro, and to the world around her was undeniable. The deeper she connected with Hiro, the more her body seemed to hum with purpose. She was no longer just a girl from another world, she was a fighter, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. One evening, after a particularly brutal battle, Izumi and Hiro stood together, watching the sun set beyond the horizon. The day had been long, the fight exhausting, but they had won. Yet, there was still an unspoken tension in the air. Hiro's gaze was distant, as it often was after their battles. He seemed lost in thought, unsure of what came next. Izumi turned to him, her heart aching for him in a way she hadn't expected. Hiro had always been there for her, even when he had doubts about his own worth. She had felt it in their every synchronized movement during battle, in the way their hearts beat as one. But now, standing beside him, she could sense the weight he carried, one that was too heavy for him to bear alone. "Hiro," she began, her voice soft, the warmth of the evening sun reflecting in her eyes, "what's bothering you?" Hiro glanced at her, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. I don't know if I can keep doing this, he confessed quietly, his voice tinged with regret. I thought I was meant to be something more. But now, I don't know what I'm fighting for anymore. Izumi's heart clenched. She knew the feeling all too well. The weight of expectations, the endless battles, the constant fight for survival, it was enough to break anyone. But Hiro didn't have to face it alone, not while she was there. She stepped closer, her fingers gently brushing his arm. You don't have to have all the answers right now, Hiro. But we're in this together. And as long as we fight side by side, I know we can make a difference. Hiro met her gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he saw something in her eyes, something bright, unyielding, full of hope. There was no doubt in her. She believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. Izumi, he whispered, his voice filled with emotion, I don't know what I'd do without you. Izumi smiled softly, her heart swelling with affection. You'll never have to find out. In that quiet moment, the world seemed to fade away. The battle, the pain, the uncertainty, it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had found each other in this vast, chaotic world. They were partners in more than just the fight for survival, they were something more. And when Hiro leaned in, his lips brushing gently against hers, it was as though the weight of the world was lifted, replaced by something pure, something true. Their kiss wasn't just an act of affection, it was a promise. A promise that no matter what, they would face everything together. In the face of the most overwhelming odds, their love would be their strength. From that moment on, Izumi knew that she wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for a future, one where she and Hiro could be together, a future where love and hope could overcome even the darkest of times. The horns on her head, once symbols of fear, were now a mark of the bond they shared, the promise of something greater than anything she had ever imagined. And no matter what challenges came their way, she would always fight for that future. For him, for them. In the days that followed, Izumi and Hiro's bond only deepened. The weight of the world outside their cockpit continued to press down on them, but within the safe confines of Strelizia, they had found something that was their own, a connection unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Izumi's horns, once a reminder of the strange new world she inhabited, had become a symbol of her strength and her bond with Hiro. When they piloted together, the horns would pulse faintly, their energy syncing with the Franxx's systems. Izumi couldn't help but wonder if the horns were somehow attuned to her emotions, her heart, and Hiro's in a way that defied explanation. But there was no time to focus on the intricacies of her transformation, there was always a new battle to fight, a new Klaxosaur to defeat. But in those quiet moments, when the world outside seemed distant, Hiro and Izumi would often find solace in each other. In the aftermath of another battle, as they sat together in the cockpit, their hands would brush, their fingers intertwining in the most natural of gestures. Hiro would look at her with eyes full of gratitude, as if every day he was discovering a new reason to care for her, to cherish the person she had become in his life. One evening, after another successful mission against the Klaxosaurs, the two found themselves alone in their shared room at the base. It was rare to have a moment like this, uninterrupted, calm, but tonight, the base was unusually quiet. The hum of the Franxx's systems was distant, and the usual tension that filled the air seemed to dissipate. Izumi sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the edge of her horn, lost in thought. Her mind often wandered to her past, her former world, and the memories of her old life. She thought about the dreams she had once held, the dreams of being a hero, and how they seemed so distant now. She had been thrust into a battle she never expected, a world where survival was a daily challenge. But when she looked at Hiro, those old doubts faded away. He was here with her, and together, they were creating something new. A future, perhaps, but also a deep connection that transcended their circumstances. Hiro sat beside her, his eyes gentle as he observed her. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" he asked softly, a knowing look in his eyes. Izumi nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I guess I can't help it. This world, it's so different from mine. Sometimes, I wonder if I'll ever be able to reconcile the two." "You don't have to," Hiro said, his voice firm but comforting. He placed a hand on hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her. You're here now, with me. And that's all that matters. The past doesn't define you, Izumi. It's what we do now that counts. Izumi's heart swelled at his words. Hiro had always been there, even when he felt lost within himself. He had given her something she never expected, a sense of belonging, of being needed. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own desires, her own struggles. They were in this together, and nothing could change that. You're right, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've been so focused on where I came from that I didn't see what I have now. Hiro leaned in slightly, his face so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath. The bond between them was undeniable, and in that moment, Izumi knew that she wasn't just Hiro's partner in battle, she was his partner in life, in whatever future they might find. Without another word, Hiro gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender and reassuring. Slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, he closed the distance between them, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, hesitant kiss. Izumi's heart raced as she leaned into the kiss, her hand reaching up to touch his cheek, her thumb caressing the skin there. The world outside faded, leaving only the two of them in the silence of their shared connection. In that moment, everything felt right. Everything felt like it had always been meant to be. When they finally pulled away, Izumi's breath was shallow, her mind reeling with emotions she couldn't quite articulate. Hiro's gaze lingered on her, filled with tenderness and a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. Do you think we'll ever find peace? Izumi asked, her voice a soft murmur. A place where we can just be. Hiro's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. I don't know what the future holds, but as long as we're together, I think we can create a future of our own. A future where we're not just fighting, but living. Izumi smiled, the warmth spreading through her chest. I believe in that future, she said firmly. And I'll fight for it, with you. The next few days were filled with the usual struggles, more battles, more Klaxosaurs to fight. But each time they stepped into the cockpit of Strelitzia, Izumi felt a renewed sense of purpose. The bond between her and Hiro had grown stronger, and it reflected in their synchronized movements during combat. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other, for the future they were beginning to believe in. One night, after a particularly brutal fight, Izumi stood outside, gazing up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the night air was cool against her skin. She closed her eyes, breathing in deeply, feeling the presence of Hiro beside her. You ever wonder what's out there? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Beyond all this, beyond the Klaxosaurs and the war, what's waiting for us? Hiro joined her, standing by her side. I don't know, he replied, his voice quiet but hopeful. But I do know that whatever it is, we'll face it together. Izumi smiled, her hand brushing against his. Yeah, together. And as they stood there, under the vast expanse of the night sky, it became clear to both of them that, no matter what the future held, they would face it as one, united in their love, their strength, and the hope that, one day, they would find the peace they both desperately yearned for. As the days turned into weeks, Hiro and Izumi continued to fight side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing battle. Strelitzia, their Franxx, seemed to hum with a life of its own, responding to their synchronized connection. The synchronization between them, both on a physical and emotional level, became flawless. Izumi's once awkward connection with this new world, this new version of herself, now felt like an inseparable part of who she was. And Hiro, though still haunted by his past doubts, had started to find his place again, his confidence returning with every battle they won. But even as they faced increasingly difficult foes, the war was far from over. And the challenges they faced were not only physical. The psychological toll of being warriors, of piloting massive mechas in a world constantly on the brink of annihilation, weighed heavily on both of them. One evening, after a particularly grueling battle against the Klaxosaurs, the two found themselves at the base once again. The familiar hum of the Franxx outside was distant, but the silence inside was almost suffocating. Both Hiro and Izumi were exhausted, but there was a quiet tension between them as they sat together in the mess hall, picking at their food. Izumi, Hiro began, his voice hesitant, do you ever wonder if this will ever end? I mean, all the fighting, all the pain. Sometimes it feels like we're just stuck in a never-ending cycle. Izumi looked at him, her expression soft but thoughtful. It wasn't the first time Hiro had expressed such concerns, and while she shared his frustrations, she had a quiet strength about her that allowed her to keep pushing forward. I think about it all the time, she said quietly, her voice steady. But what we have, what we're fighting for, that's what keeps me going. It's the belief that we can create a better future. That we can bring an end to all this pain. Hiro met her gaze, his eyes searching her face as though trying to understand something deeper, something unspoken. You really believe that, don't you? Izumi nodded. I do. I've fought for so long to believe in something greater than myself. And right now, that's you, Hiro. Us. I believe that together, we can change things. Not just for us, but for everyone. Her words were like a lifeline, and for the first time in a long while, Hiro felt a flicker of hope in his chest. He had spent so much time questioning his worth, wondering if he had anything to offer. But Izumi had always seen something in him, something he couldn't see in himself. Izumi reached out, her hand brushing his, the soft warmth of her skin grounding him. The touch was simple, but it carried so much meaning, a reminder of their shared bond. I'll always be by your side, Izumi said, her voice low but firm. I'll fight for you, for us, until the very end. A silence fell between them, but it was a comfortable one, filled with understanding. Hiro squeezed her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers in a gentle promise. I won't let go, he said quietly. Days later, the two of them were once again called into action. A new wave of Klaxosaurs had appeared, more powerful and terrifying than ever before. As the alarm blared and the troops scrambled to prepare, Hiro and Izumi stood together, their hands finding each other in the chaos. Ready? Hiro asked, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty that always accompanied these battles. Izumi looked up at him, her emerald eyes shining with unwavering resolve. I'm always ready. With you, I can face anything. They ran to Strelitzia, their movements synchronized as if their bodies knew exactly what the other needed. Once inside the cockpit, the familiar hum of the Franxx enveloped them, and for a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade away. It was just them, their hearts beating in time, their thoughts blending together as they prepared for what lay ahead. Let's show them what we can do, Izumi whispered. And with that, they launched into the fray. The battle was fierce, more intense than anything they had faced before. The Klaxosaurs were unlike any enemy they had fought in the past, fast, relentless, and incredibly powerful. But Hiro and Izumi were ready. They were a force, their movements seamless as they worked together to take down the monstrous creatures that threatened their world. Izumi's heart raced as she felt the power surge through her, her horns glowing with the energy of the Franxx. With each strike, she felt herself becoming one with the machine, and with Hiro. It was as though they had transcended the need for words, their connection allowing them to anticipate each other's every move. Now, Hiro shouted, his voice filled with determination. Izumi didn't hesitate. She pushed forward, Strelitzia's arms moving like a well-oiled machine as they delivered a final blow to the heart of the largest Klaxosaur. The creature let out a deafening roar before collapsing, and the ground shook beneath them as the battle ended. Breathing heavily, Izumi slumped back against her seat, her eyes still focused on the now quiet battlefield. Hiro was beside her, his chest rising and falling in time with hers. They had done it again, together. Is it over? Hiro asked, his voice quiet but filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Izumi nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. For now, they both knew that the war was far from over, that there would be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But in that moment, they allowed themselves a brief reprieve, a moment where they could be together without the weight of the world on their shoulders. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the sky, Hiro and Izumi stood together, side by side. The future was uncertain, but they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and that was enough. You know, Izumi said, her voice thoughtful, I used to think that being a hero was about saving the world. But now, I think it's about the people we fight for. Hiro smiled softly, his hand reaching for hers. And the ones we love. Izumi squeezed his hand, the connection between them undeniable. Yeah, and the ones we love. In that moment, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, united in their love, their strength, and their unshakable belief that they could create a world where peace was more than just a dream. The days passed in a blur of missions and moments of fleeting peace, but Hiro and Izumi's bond only grew stronger. Each battle, each victory, brought them closer, not just as partners in battle, but as partners in life. The weight of their responsibility never truly lifted, but they had found solace in each other, in the unspoken understanding that no matter how grim the future seemed, they were not alone. As the war dragged on, they began to notice something strange. The connection between them seemed to deepen, the synchronization of their movements in Strelizia becoming almost flawless. It was as if their hearts, minds, and souls were melding together, the distance between them shrinking with each passing day. One night, after a particularly difficult battle, Hiro and Izumi found themselves walking through the quiet base. The sounds of the other pilots preparing for the next mission echoed faintly in the distance, but in the small, tranquil space between them, the world seemed to slow down. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Izumi began, her voice soft but steady. Hiro looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "About what?" Izumi hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "About how much I've changed since coming to this world. How much we've changed." She turned her gaze to the stars above, their soft light casting a gentle glow on her face. "I never imagined this kind of life, but now, I don't want to imagine a life without it. Without you." Hiro's heart ached at her words, the sincerity in them echoing in the depths of his soul. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Izumi, I don't think I ever truly understood what it meant to fight for something. Not until I met you. You've shown me what it means to have a reason to live. A reason to keep fighting. You're my reason." Izumi's breath caught at his words. She had always been the one to lift him up, to encourage him when he doubted himself. But in that moment, Hiro had given her something just as powerful, his heart, his trust, and his unwavering belief in her. He wasn't just fighting alongside her, he was fighting for her, and she felt it with every fiber of her being. She took a step closer to him, her eyes locking onto his, the intensity of their shared emotions clear between them. "Hiro, But before she could finish, Hiro gently cupped her face, his touch tender, as though he were afraid she might slip away if he wasn't careful. The space between them closed, and in that moment, there was no war, no danger, no uncertainty, just the two of them, standing in the quiet of the night, sharing something deeper than words could express. "Izumi," Hiro whispered, his voice hoarse, "I want this. I want you. No matter what happens, I want you to know that you're everything to me." Before he could finish, Izumi closed the distance between them, her lips capturing his in a kiss that was both desperate and full of love. It wasn't just an act of passion, it was a promise, a declaration of everything they had become. A promise that no matter how dark the world around them became, they would face it together, side by side, their hearts forever intertwined. When they finally pulled away, they stood there for a moment, their foreheads resting together, their breaths mingling. "I love you," Izumi whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you too," Hiro replied, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "And I always will." They stood there for a long while, wrapped in each other's presence, the world around them temporarily forgotten. The stars above seemed to shine brighter in that moment, as if the universe itself was witnessing the bond they shared. A bond that couldn't be broken by the endless war, by the pain of their pasts, or by the challenges that still lay ahead. The next day, a new mission awaited them. The Klaxosaurs were advancing, and they had no choice but to face them head-on. As Hiro and Izumi prepared to climb into Strelizia, they shared one last look, their hands brushing briefly before they took their places. The familiar hum of the Franxx filled their ears, but their minds were focused entirely on each other. "You ready?" Izumi asked, her voice steady despite the tension that filled the air. "Always," Hiro replied with a small smile. "We're in this together." And with that, they launched into battle, their synchronized movements as fluid and natural as ever. Every strike, every maneuver, was fueled by their shared purpose, to protect each other, to protect their world, and to ensure that the love they had found would endure through whatever came next. As they fought, their hearts beat in time with Strelesia's systems, their movements seamless. Every time they defeated a Klaxosaur, it was more than just a victory on the battlefield, it was a testament to their bond, their love, and their unshakable belief in each other. But as the battle wore on, the enemy's forces grew stronger, and the situation became more dire. Hiro and Izumi fought with everything they had, but they could feel the strain of the endless battle. The Klaxosaurs were relentless, and the toll on their bodies, both physically and emotionally, was mounting. Izumi's hand gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white with effort. Her horns, which had always glowed faintly in battle, were now shining brightly, an outward manifestation of the power and energy that surged through her. But even with all of this, she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "We can't keep this up forever," she said through clenched teeth, her voice strained. "I know," Hiro replied, his voice equally tense. "But we'll keep fighting, Izumi. As long as we're together, we'll never give up." With one final push, they delivered a devastating blow to the Klaxosaur's core, watching as the massive creature collapsed in a heap of rubble. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was a welcome silence. They had won, again. Breathing heavily, Izumi slumped back in her seat, her body aching from the intense fight. Hiro did the same, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he tried to regain his breath. "We did it," Izumi said, her voice low but full of satisfaction. "Yeah," Hiro agreed, his lips curling into a small smile. "We did." But as they sat there, amidst the wreckage of the battlefield, Izumi couldn't help but wonder, how many more battles would they face? How many more times would they be forced to fight for their future? The road ahead was uncertain, and the war was far from over. But one thing was certain, as long as they had each other, they would face whatever came their way, together. Their hearts beat as one, and no matter how long the road, no matter the challenges ahead, they would never stop fighting for each other, for the future they dreamed of, and for the love that bound them in ways neither of them had ever imagined. As time went on, Hiro and Izumi's bond continued to evolve. The war waged on around them, but their connection seemed to transcend the chaos. The days blurred together, filled with the ever-present threat of Klaxosaurs, the weight of duty, and the relentless grind of surviving in a world at war. Yet, through it all, they found moments, fleeting but precious, that allowed them to reconnect and remind each other of why they kept fighting. One night, after a particularly brutal mission, Hiro and Izumi found themselves alone again, sitting in their shared quarters. The exhaustion was evident on their faces, their bodies aching from the intensity of the day's battle. But even as fatigue pulled at them, the need to be with each other remained. Izumi sat on the bed, her head resting in her hands, her fingers rubbing her temples. Her mind felt heavy, weighed down by the endless cycles of battle and loss. She thought about the future, about the world they were fighting to protect, and the future that seemed so elusive, so far away. Hiro sat beside her, his presence a quiet comfort. He didn't speak right away, instead, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder, offering the kind of understanding that only someone who truly knew her could give. "Izumi," Hiro said softly after a long pause, his voice filled with concern. "You're thinking too much again." Izumi let out a small sigh, her shoulders sagging beneath his touch. "It's hard not to. There's always something to fight for, something to protect. But sometimes I wonder if it's ever going to be enough. If we'll ever truly find peace." The vulnerability in her words hit Hiro hard. He had always admired her strength, her determination, but in moments like these, he saw the weight she carried, the doubt she didn't always show to the others. He understood that feeling all too well, and it was in these moments that he wished he could do more than just fight beside her. "You know," Hiro began, his voice gentle but resolute, "I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've carried so much, not just for yourself but for everyone around you. And I've seen you fight, not just for survival, but for something greater. You're not alone in this." Izumi looked up at him, her emerald eyes meeting his brown ones. "But we don't know if it's ever going to end, Hiro." The war, the Klaxosaurs, it feels like we're caught in a loop, fighting for something we're not even sure will come. What happens when we've fought all we can and there's nothing left to give? Hiro's heart ached as he saw the pain in her eyes. He reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then we'll still be here, together," he said, his voice full of conviction. "It's not about how long we fight or how hard it gets. It's about who we fight for, and right now, we fight for each other." Izumi felt the truth of his words seep into her, like a balm to her weary soul. Hiro had always known how to give her strength when she thought she had none left to give. He was her anchor, her reason to keep moving forward when everything seemed hopeless. With a sigh, Izumi leaned her head against his shoulder, allowing herself to let go of the tension she had been holding for so long. Hiro wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, offering her the comfort she needed but never asked for. There was a quiet strength in his embrace, and in that moment, Izumi felt safe. "Maybe we don't need to have all the answers," she murmured, her voice soft and filled with vulnerability. "Maybe we just need to keep believing in each other." Hiro's heart swelled at her words. "We'll always have each other," he promised, his voice steady and unwavering. "That's what matters." The two of them sat in silence for a while, wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly above them, the stars shining down like beacons of hope, even in the darkest of times. The days that followed were filled with more battles, more moments of uncertainty, but the bond between Hiro and Izumi remained unbreakable. They fought not just for survival, but for each other, for the future they dreamed of. And though the war raged on, there was something that kept them going, something far more powerful than the endless cycles of violence. It wasn't the hope of victory or the promise of a peaceful world. It was their love, quiet but fierce, unwavering even in the face of the greatest challenges. It was the knowledge that no matter how many battles they faced, no matter how many enemies they had to fight, they would always have each other. One day, as they stood together on the battlefield after another hard-fought victory, Izumi felt something shift within her. The war wasn't over. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel as though she was fighting alone. She glanced at Hiro, her heart swelling with a love that seemed to fill every corner of her being. In his eyes, she saw the same determination, the same hope, the same belief in something greater than themselves. Izumi took a deep breath, her body tired but her spirit renewed. "We're going to make it through this, aren't we?" Hiro smiled softly, his hand finding hers. "Together, we will." And as they stood there, side by side, the sounds of the battle fading away, Izumi knew one thing for certain: as long as they had each other, they would never stop fighting. They would never stop believing in the possibility of a better future. For love, after all, was the strongest weapon they had. And as long as they were together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The days following their quiet moment on the battlefield felt like a turning point for both Hiro and Izumi. The war was still raging, the stakes higher than ever, but there was a renewed strength in them, something that transcended the weight of their mission. They had found something worth fighting for beyond survival, each other, and the hope of a better tomorrow. The next few weeks brought new challenges. The Klaxosaurs grew more powerful, their attacks more coordinated, and their very presence seemed to threaten the fragile peace that Hiro and Izumi fought for. But through each encounter, their bond only deepened. Their synchronization in the cockpit of Strelitzia became nearly perfect, each movement flowing with a shared understanding, a bond that went beyond mere words or actions. It was instinct, it was trust, and it was love. But as the intensity of the battles increased, so did the strain on their bodies and minds. The emotional and physical toll of war began to wear on them, and there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush them. One evening, after an especially difficult mission where they had barely escaped with their lives, Hiro and Izumi found themselves back in their quarters, their bodies sore and their minds exhausted. It was the first real moment of peace they had had in days. Izumi sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her temples. The exhaustion was overwhelming, and the constant battles left her feeling like she was constantly on the edge of breaking. Hiro stood beside her, his gaze soft, his expression filled with concern. "You okay?" Hiro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew how hard she pushed herself, how much she carried, and he hated seeing her like this, physically and emotionally drained. Izumi looked up at him, her green eyes tired but still full of that same determination he had come to love. She gave him a small, but genuine smile, though it didn't reach her eyes entirely. "I'm fine. Just tired." Hiro sat down beside her, his hand brushing against hers. His touch was gentle, a silent reassurance that she wasn't alone. "You don't have to be fine all the time, you know. I'm here, Izumi. I'm here for you, no matter what." Izumi closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to lean into his presence. "I know," she whispered. "But it feels like there's always more to do. More to fight for. And sometimes, I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders." Hiro's heart ached at her words. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her skin. "You don't have to carry it alone, Izumi. I'm here with you, always." Her breath hitched as she met his eyes, the depth of his words settling deep within her chest. He meant it, every word, every promise. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to truly believe it. She wasn't alone. She didn't have to bear the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. "I know," she whispered again, her voice trembling slightly. "And I'm not alone. Because I have you." Hiro leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You'll never be alone. Not while I'm here." The moment was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt like a brief reprieve from the constant battles they faced. In each other's arms, they found comfort and solace, a temporary escape from the chaos of the world around them. But reality couldn't be ignored for long. The next day, a new threat arose. The Klaxosaur forces had begun a large-scale assault on one of the remaining human strongholds. The battle would be one of the largest they had faced yet, and the pressure weighed heavily on everyone. Izumi and Hiro knew that this fight could change everything, either for better or worse. Before they left for the mission, they stood together outside the hangar, the cool night air brushing against their skin. The sound of distant alarms and preparation filled the air, but in this moment, everything felt still. Izumi turned to Hiro, her expression serious but resolute. "We've been through so much together, Hiro. But I want you to know that no matter what happens today, I'm so glad we met. I'm so glad I have you." Hiro's heart swelled with emotion as he gazed at her, the strength in her words bolstering his own resolve. He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "I'm glad we met too, Izumi. And I'll fight for you. Always." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The future was uncertain, the outcome of the battle unknown, but they had each other. And that was enough to face whatever came next. The battle was fierce, more intense than they had ever imagined. The Klaxosaurs were unlike anything they had faced before, larger, stronger, and more intelligent. But Hiro and Izumi didn't back down. They fought with everything they had, their movements fluid and coordinated as they piloted Strelizia. Each strike, each blow, was executed with a shared determination to protect the world they loved and the love they had found in each other. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that they were facing overwhelming odds. Their energy was fading, their bodies were weary, and the toll of the ongoing fight was beginning to take its toll on Strelizia itself. The Franxx groaned under the strain, and Izumi could feel the power beginning to wane. "We can't stop now, Hiro," she shouted, her voice raw with urgency. "We have to push through. We can't let them win." Hiro gripped the controls tighter, his heart pounding in his chest. "I won't let you go, Izumi. I won't let anything happen to you." The two of them shared a determined look, their eyes filled with the same unwavering resolve. Together, they made their final push, an all-out attack that required every ounce of energy they had left. With a cry of effort, they unleashed the full force of Strelizia's power, a massive blast of energy that collided with the Klaxosaur's core. The explosion was deafening. The earth shook as the massive creature crumbled before them. The silence that followed was almost as intense as the battle itself. Izumi and Hiro collapsed into their seats, their bodies trembling from the exhaustion of the fight. "Is it over?" Izumi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hiro nodded, his face covered in sweat, his body still shaking with the adrenaline of the battle. "Yeah, it's over. For now. But they both knew that the war was far from finished. There would always be more battles, more fights to endure. But as they sat there, in the aftermath of the battle, Hiro reached for Izumi's hand, his grip tight and comforting. "We made it through this one," he said quietly. "And we'll make it through the next one. Together." Izumi smiled, her heart full of warmth despite the exhaustion. "Together," she echoed, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. Because together, they were unstoppable. The days that followed the battle were quiet, but the calm was temporary. The victory over the Klaxosaur felt like a hard-earned breath of relief, but it didn't last long. The weight of the war was still heavy on their shoulders, and the looming threats never stopped. Izumi and Hiro spent the next few days recovering, both physically and emotionally. The exhaustion of the fight had left them both battered, but even in the midst of their fatigue, their bond grew stronger. They leaned on each other more than ever before, their moments of silence shared comfortably, understanding without needing to speak. But there was a restlessness that lingered within them both. They knew that there were more battles to come, and the peace they'd just fought for could be fleeting. One evening, as they sat together in their quarters, Hiro broke the silence. "Izumi, I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice uncharacteristically serious. He turned to face her, his brown eyes searching her face for any sign of what she might be feeling. Izumi looked up at him, her green eyes soft with concern. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Hiro hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. "I keep thinking about the future. About what happens after this war is over. If it ever ends. And about what kind of world we'll be left with when the fighting is done." Izumi felt a lump form in her throat at his words. It was something she had been avoiding, something they had both tried not to dwell on, the uncertainty of the world beyond the war. But it was becoming harder to ignore. She met his gaze, her heart aching as she felt the weight of his thoughts. "I've thought about that too," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet sadness she had been holding back. "The future is uncertain, and it feels like no matter how hard we fight, we can never be sure what comes after. But, I've realized something." Hiro raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" Izumi smiled, a small but genuine smile. "That no matter how dark the future may seem, I have you. And that's enough for me. As long as we have each other, Hiro, we'll figure it out. Together." Her words, simple yet profound, struck a chord deep within him. Hiro reached for her hand, his grip tight, as if to reassure himself that she was really there. That they were really there, together. "You're right," he replied, his voice full of emotion. "As long as we're together, I believe we can face anything. The future, it's uncertain, but I know I want to be in it with you." Izumi squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. The weight of the world might still press down on them, but with Hiro by her side, the impossible seemed a little more bearable. The next mission came swiftly. The Klaxosaurs had launched another devastating offensive, and Hiro and Izumi knew they couldn't afford to lose ground. The battle was vicious, the stakes higher than ever. But as they climbed into Strelizia, the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on both of them. "Izumi, no matter what happens today," Hiro started, his voice steady but his eyes full of a deep, unspoken emotion. He looked over at her, his grip on the controls tightening. "I need you to know that I love you. I always have. I always will." Izumi's heart skipped a beat at his words. She turned to him, her eyes filled with the same love, the same determination. "I love you too, Hiro. And we'll make it through this. Together. I promise." With a final, shared look of understanding, they activated Strelizia and took off into the sky. The roar of the engines was drowned out by the pounding of their hearts, synchronized in a way that made them feel unstoppable. The battle was brutal. The Klaxosaurs had adapted, learning from past engagements, and their attacks were more strategic and relentless. But Hiro and Izumi fought with everything they had, their movements in sync, as if they were one entity, one unstoppable force. Each strike felt like a heartbeat, each maneuver a shared breath between them. Their power surged, fueled not just by the strength of their Franxx, but by the love they shared, a love that seemed to fuel every action, every decision. As the battle reached its climax, a massive Klaxosaur, larger than anything they had faced before, emerged from the depths. Its strength was overwhelming, and it seemed to anticipate every move they made. The odds were stacked against them. "Izumi," Hiro shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't let it get any closer to the city." "I know," Izumi replied, her voice just as fierce. "We'll stop it, together." The final blow was coming. Hiro and Izumi channeled every last ounce of their energy into Strelitzia. The Franxx powered up, the energy surrounding it crackling as the two of them locked their focus on the massive creature before them. With a final, coordinated strike, they pierced the Klaxosaur's core, causing it to collapse into a heap of debris and dust. The silence that followed the explosion was deafening. Both Hiro and Izumi were left breathless, their bodies drained from the intensity of the battle. Strelitzia hovered over the wreckage, its systems flickering as the strain of the battle took its toll. "We did it," Hiro whispered, his voice hoarse from the effort. He let out a long breath, his eyes scanning the damage. "We stopped it." Izumi, her breath shaky and her body aching, smiled faintly. "Yeah, we did. Together." As the battle concluded, the two of them hovered in the aftermath, the wreckage of their enemies scattered around them. They had won, for now. But Hiro knew, as he looked at Izumi, that the true victory wasn't in defeating the Klaxosaurs. It was in the promise they made to each other, that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Strelitzia began its descent back to base, and as the world below came into view, Hiro's mind wandered back to their shared moments of peace. The quiet after the storms, the tender words exchanged in the calm of the night, and the way they had leaned on each other when everything felt like it was falling apart. "Let's build that future, Izumi," Hiro said softly, his voice filled with quiet hope. "Together." Izumi turned to him, her green eyes filled with the same determination, the same love that had been there from the start. "Together," she echoed, knowing that no matter how long the road ahead, as long as they had each other, they would never stop fighting. And so, they continued, side by side, ready to face whatever came next with unwavering resolve, a shared heart, and the power of their love to guide them through the darkness. Because in a world torn apart by war, their love was the one thing that could never be broken. The days that followed were a blend of both relief and uncertainty. Hiro and Izumi had once again proven that together, they could overcome anything. But as the world around them continued to change, the war was not yet over. The quiet moments they shared between battles felt like fleeting glimpses of peace in a world that was anything but. Strelitzia had earned its rest after the grueling battle, and Hiro and Izumi were given time to recover. The days that followed felt strangely ordinary despite the ongoing war. They spent time together, talking, laughing, and just being in each other's presence, moments that gave them the strength to face the next challenge, no matter how daunting it would be. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of crimson and gold, Hiro and Izumi stood together on the balcony overlooking the base. It was a rare quiet moment, a small window of time where there were no missions, no enemies, just the two of them in the fading light of day. Izumi leaned against the railing, her hand gently resting in Hiro's. The night air was cool, but her heart felt warm, filled with a contentment that had been foreign to her for so long. She glanced up at Hiro, who stood beside her, his expression soft but thoughtful. "You know, Hiro," she began, her voice gentle, "I never thought we'd come this far. I always thought that the war would end us before we had a chance to find something worth fighting for." Hiro turned his gaze to her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I know what you mean. But now, I realize something." "What's that?" Izumi asked, turning toward him. Hiro looked out toward the horizon, the sky tinged with the colors of a setting sun. "I realize that even in the darkest of times, even when everything feels hopeless, there's always something worth fighting for. And that something is you, Izumi." Her heart skipped a beat as she looked at him, his brown eyes full of tenderness, full of love. The weight of the world seemed to disappear in that moment, leaving only the two of them, standing together, knowing that they had each other. "I love you," Hiro said, his voice firm and sure. "And I will keep fighting for you, for us, for the future we can build Tears welled up in Izumi's eyes as she reached up to cup his face, her fingers brushing against his skin. I love you too, hero. I always have. And I know that whatever happens, we'll face it together. They shared a long, silent moment, their hands intertwined, both of them knowing that they had come to a place where no external force could tear them apart. The war, the uncertainty of the future, none of it mattered in that moment. All that mattered was their love. In the days that followed, the war did eventually draw to a close. It wasn't without sacrifice, and there were battles that had cost them dearly. But the final strike came, and the world slowly began to rebuild itself. The Klaxosaurs were defeated, and the remaining threats were contained. Hiro and Izumi, together, stood at the forefront of this new beginning. They were no longer just soldiers or warriors, they were symbols of hope, of resilience, of love in a world that had been torn apart. The world they fought to protect, the world they had believed in, was beginning to heal. And so, in the aftermath of the battle, as the world started to piece itself back together, Hiro and Izumi made a vow, not just to each other, but to the future they would build. They would never stop fighting for what mattered. They would never stop believing in the possibility of a better world. They would never stop loving each other. Together, they walked into the future, side by side, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that love had been their greatest weapon all along. And that, in the end, was enough. The sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the world they had saved, and Hiro and Izumi stood together, the future ahead of them, full of endless possibilities. They had won the war. And they had won each other. Together, they would face whatever came next. And that was all they needed. And that's it for today's. I hope you enjoyed this exciting journey into what if Female Deku was in the world of Darling in the Franxx. If you liked the story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing fanfiction adventures. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.